From the dust, a civilization appeared on the flat land of Mesopotamia with something the world had never seen before. Not just cities, temples, or laws carved in stone, but writing itself. The Sumerians appeared suddenly and fully formed, with star maps that track patterns lasting thousands of years, math that still controls our clocks today, and stories whose effects shaped every holy book that came after. Then, like a candle blown out by the wind, they disappeared. What remains are tablets, thousands and thousands of fragile clay pieces covered in wedge-shaped marks. To someone who doesn't know how to read them, they look ordinary, just broken pieces of old pottery. But to those who can read them, they're doorways. Doorways into a world that recorded cosmic time through kings, built temples as star-watching machines, and saved memories so ancient they came before their own civilization. Some tablets tell about rulers who ruled for tens of thousands of years. Others track star movements that can only be seen across centuries. Still others name cities archaeologists thought were completely made up until the ruins were found exactly where the tablets said they would be. Hidden in this clay library are secrets that blur the line between history and legend, science and mythology, memory and prediction. Tonight, we followed those clues, symbol by symbol, tablet by tablet, to uncover 10 ancient secrets hidden in Sumerian clay. This is 10 ancient secrets hidden in Sumerian tablets. Secret number 1: the kings before the flood. Deep beneath the quiet halls of Oxford's Ashmolean Museum sits a clay prism no larger than a wine bottle. Its surface, carved with thousands of wedge-shaped cuneiform marks, contains one of the most confusing records of the ancient world. To someone walking by, it might seem like just another artifact. But to historians, it represents something far more mysterious: the Sumerian king list. Its opening line reads like the first verse of a holy text: when kingship descended from heaven, it was in the Ridu. That single sentence changes everything. To the Sumerians, kingship wasn't invented by humans. It was a divine gift given from the sky itself. Eridu, one of the world's earliest cities near modern Abu Sharian in southern Iraq, was the sacred birthplace where heaven's rule first touched the earth. But what follows that line makes no sense. The list names 8 rulers who ruled before the Great Flood, the antediluvian kings, each with lifespans so huge they seem impossible. Alulim of Eridu ruled for 28,800 years. Alalgar for 36,000, and Dumuzid for 43,200. The total time before the flood, according to the tablets, is more than 241,000 years. Then the record simply states, then the flood swept over. Afterward, new kings appear. Their rules shrink from thousands of years to hundreds, then to decades, then to normal human lifespans. For over a century, scholars have struggled to explain these numbers. Some say they're purely symbolic, a storytelling trick to make legendary rulers appear godlike to justify political power. Others argue something far stranger, that the numbers encode astronomical cycles, using Sumer's BASC 60 math to measure not years of human life, but the rhythm of the cosmos itself. When changed from years to lunar months, many of these reigns line up with known celestial periods: the 26,000-year wobble of Earth's axis, the 360-day idealized solar year that controlled ancient calendars, the synodic cycles of Venus and Jupiter. These figures may not describe lifespans at all, but rather the movements of heaven as witnessed through generations of skywatching, compressed into the reigns of divine kings. It's a theory that transforms the king lists from myth into mathematics. The artifact itself has a history worth noting. The most complete version, the Wall-Blundell prism, was discovered in the early 20th century by an Oxford scholar named Henry Wall-Blundell during digs in southern Iraq. Dating to around 1800 BC, this four-sided clay prism stands roughly 8 inches tall, each face carved with columns of cuneiform text. It wasn't unique. 18 different versions of the king list have been found across Mesopotamia, written in both Sumerian and Akkadian, each differing slightly in detail. This variation is important. The list wasn't a fixed historical record. It was a living document, rewritten and changed by later dynasties to make their rule seem legitimate. Kings of Ur, Kish, and Ison copied it to prove their divine right to the throne, tracing their family line back through time to heaven itself. In this sense, the king lists worked as political propaganda, a family tree connecting mortal rulers to cosmic authority. But beneath that political layer lies something older and harder to explain. Archaeology adds weight to the mystery. Beneath the ruins of Eridu, the city where kingship supposedly descended from heaven, diggers discovered 18 separate layers of settlement stacked like pages in a book. The oldest dates to around 5400 BC, revealing temples already lined up with celestial patterns, proof that Eridu had been a sacred site long before the invention of writing, long before recorded history. If the Sumerians believed kingship descended there, it may not have been a metaphor. It could reflect an ancestral memory of people who arrived with advanced knowledge, suddenly transforming the landscape into something resembling civilization. Then there's the flood. The king list's most haunting feature is the line that divides everything: then the flood swept over. For centuries, this was dismissed as myth. But in the 1920s, archaeologists working at Shurapak, ancient Sumer's breadbasket city, uncovered something unexpected: a deep layer of water-laid silt stretching for miles, sandwiched between two distinct cultural layers. Beneath it houses, pottery, tools from one era. Above it a new culture entirely. Radiocarbon dating. Placed this flood deposit around 2900 BC. The boundary lined up almost perfectly with the transition between antediluvian and post-diluvian kings. In the tablets, what had been dismissed as legend now had geological support. Similar flood layers have been found at Ur, Uruk, and Kish, though not all date to the same period, suggesting multiple regional flooding events, rather than one global deluge. Still, the evidence confirms that catastrophic floods shaped Mesopotamian memory. Living on a floodplain between two unpredictable rivers, the Sumerians understood water as both giver and destroyer. Their mythology didn't invent the flood, it remembered it. Echoes of this catastrophe appear across the ancient world. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes Utnapishtim surviving a divine flood sent to wipe out humanity. The Atrahasis epic tells the same story from a different angle. Later, the biblical book of Genesis records Noah and the Ark. These tales differ in detail, but not in essence: a cleansing, a restart, a chosen survivor who preserves life through chaos. Could the Sumerians have preserved an ancestral memory of a real event, perhaps? Triggered by sudden climate shifts at the end of the Younger Dryas period around 9600 BC, when melting glaciers caused sea levels to rise dramatically, swollen coastlines and river valleys. Some researchers believe the vast numbers preceding the flood might represent geological eras, the spans between environmental resets. In that reading, the king list becomes less a political document and more a scientific record in mythic form, a memory of Earth's periodic catastrophes written as the reigns of gods. Yet not all evidence is symbolic. Several kings listed after the flood, Etana of Kish, Lugalbanta, Gilgamesh of Uruk, appear in independent inscriptions, temple dedications, and physical artifacts. Their names have been found stamped on bricks, carved into monuments, mentioned in administrative records. This mixing of real rulers with impossible reigns creates the paradox that still haunts Assyriology. How do you separate legend from history, when the ancients never drew that line? Modern technology is giving us new ways to study these tablets. 3D laser scanning allows researchers to map every wedge mark with microscopic precision, revealing corrections, erasures, and notes made by scribes separated by centuries. The prism's surface shows that the king list wasn't a static artifact, but a palimpsest of memory, a story, continually rewritten as dynasties rose and fell. In that sense, it mirrors the very civilization it describes, enduring but never fixed. The question remains: where did these extraordinary numbers come from? Why record them so carefully if they were never meant to be literal? When the Sumerians inscribed a king ruling for 36,000 years, perhaps they weren't exaggerating. Perhaps they were encoding meaning in a language we've only begun to understand, expressing that these figures represented ages of divine order, not mortal time. The language of the gods was number, and only those initiated into its mystery could read between the symbols. The king list remains one of humanity's most extraordinary paradoxes: a document, too mythic to be history, too historical to be myth, a bridge between cosmos and clay. But if the tablets reveal cosmic time encoded in kingship, hidden in museums and collections across the world, then what secrets lie buried in the structures the Sumerians left behind? The massive temples that still rise from the desert sand, built according to principles we're only beginning to decode. What architectural mysteries wait in Sumer's sacred ziggurats? Rising from the desert plains of southern Iraq, the great ziggurat of Ur stands as one of the ancient world's most impressive monuments. Even in ruins, its massive mud brick terraces dominate the landscape, a man-made mountain visible for miles across the flat Mesopotamian expanse. To modern eyes, it appears as an architectural achievement, impressive but explainable. To the Sumerians, it was something else entirely: a stairway between worlds. But what makes these structures truly remarkable isn't their size. It's what the tablets reveal about how they were built and why. Hidden in museum collections across the world are clay tablets containing ziggurat blueprints, construction ratios, and ritual instructions. These aren't simple building plans. They're encoded with astronomical alignments, mathematical relationships, and cosmic symbolism so precise that modern archaeoastronomers are still decoding their full meaning. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, constructed around 2100 BC under King Ur-Nammu, demonstrates this knowledge in its very foundations. The structure originally rose in 3 massive tiers, each smaller than the one below, connected by monumental staircases that met at the summit shrine. Tablets describe the shrine as the dwelling place of Nana, the moon god, the patron deity of Ur. The choice of a moon deity wasn't random. The entire structure is oriented with remarkable precision to true north, aligned within a fraction of a degree. But more significantly, its corners mark the cardinal directions with an accuracy that required sophisticated astronomical observation. The building's proportions, the ratios between base width, height, and tier dimensions match mathematical relationships found in lunar cycles. Tablets describing ziggurat construction reveal that Sumerian architects worked from cosmic blueprints. One such text specifies that the base of a temple should measure 60 by 60, not just a convenient number, but a reflection of the sexagesimal system that governed Sumerian mathematics and astronomy. This same BASC 60 system divided the circle into 360 degrees, the year into 12 months, and the day into units still used on every clock in the modern world. The alignment goes deeper. Archaeological surveys using modern instruments have confirmed that ziggurats across Mesopotamia are positioned to track lunar standstills, the 18.6-year cycle, during which the moon's rising and setting positions shift along the horizon. These extreme positions, north and south, would have been marked by the ziggurat sight lines, allowing priests to predict eclipses and calculate celestial cycles spanning generations. Solstice alignments appear as well. At Uruk tablets reference the House of Heaven, a temple complex whose main entrance aligns with sunrise on the summer solstice. The sacred precinct at Nippur contains similar orientation texts, describing how temple walls should face the place where the sun rises at the turning of the year. But perhaps the most profound secret encoded in ziggurat architecture is conceptual rather than mathematical. The Sumerians thought of the universe as a three-tiered cosmos, and the ziggurat physically embodied this worldview. At the summit heaven, the domain of Anu, the sky god, reached by climbing physically upward toward the stars. At ground level earth, governed by Enlil, lord of wind and storm, the realm where humans lived and worked. Below, in the foundations, the Abzu, the cosmic abyss of freshwater ruled by Enki, god of wisdom and creation, symbolized by wells and channels built into the ziggurat space. The ziggurat wasn't simply a temple, it was a vertical axis connecting all three realms, the cosmic mountain where heaven touched earth, and where earth's roots reached down into the primordial waters from which all life emerged. Ritual tablets describe ceremonies conducted at different levels of the ziggurat, each corresponding to a different cosmic sphere. Priests would ascend the staircases at dawn, moving symbolically from the underworld to the heavens as the sun rose. At night, they descended, mirroring the sun's journey through the netherworld. The building itself became a map of divine geography, worked daily by those who served the gods. Yet beneath these massive structures lies another mystery. Excavations at multiple sites including Eridu, Uruk, and Ur itself reveal that the visible ziggurats were built atop older foundations. Layer beneath layer, temple beneath temple, stretching back centuries before the great monuments we see today. At Eridu, archaeologists uncovered 18 successive temple levels, the earliest dating to 5400 BC, over 3,000 years before the invention of cuneiform writing. These proto-temples already demonstrate astronomical alignment, already incorporate the same cosmic symbolism, already divide space according to principles that would govern ziggurat construction millennia later. This raises an unsettling question: where did this architectural knowledge come from? The conventional answer is gradual development, generations of builders refining techniques, priests accumulating astronomical data over centuries, knowledge passed down through oral tradition, until it could finally be recorded in writing. But the earliest temples show sophistication that seems fully formed, not experimental. The alignments are precise from the beginning. The ratios are consistent across sites separated by hundreds of miles. The symbolic vocabulary, the three-tiered cosmos, the cardinal orientations, the lunar and solar cycles appears complete. Some researchers propose that ziggurat architecture preserves knowledge from before the historical record begins, possibly from cultures displaced by climate change or rising sea levels during the transition from the Ice Age. These hypothetical predecessors might have possessed advanced understanding of astronomy and geometry, passing it to the early Mesopotamians, who then encoded it into permanent structures, and eventually into tablets. Others argue this grants too much mystery to what can be explained through careful observation and mathematical reasoning. The Sumerians were brilliant astronomers and engineers. They didn't need lost predecessors to explain their achievements. They watched the sky for generations, measured, calculated, and built according to what they discovered. But the tablets themselves remain unclear. Construction texts describe architectural principles as if they were already ancient, referring to the old measures and the way it was done at the beginning of time. They speak of temple building as an act of cosmic restoration, not innovation, as if each new ziggurat recreated an original pattern established when the world was young. Modern laser scanning and photogrammetry are revealing details impossible to see with the naked eye. The mudbrick facades of ziggurats contain microelements, subtle angles in staircase construction, and mathematical progressions in decorative elements. These features suggest layers of encoded information beyond the purely functional geometric relationships that may have served as teaching tools, astronomical calculators, or ritual guides for initiated priests. The ziggurat was library, observatory, and temple combined, a structure built to mathematical specifications that connected human society to the rhythms of the cosmos, a physical manifestation of divine order where kings were crowned, priests tracked the heavens, and the boundary between earth and sky grew thin. But if these temples encoded the sky in brick, built according to cosmic blueprints preserved in clay, then what do the myths themselves reveal? The epic story is inscribed on thousands of tablets describing heroes, gods, and journeys that mirror the movements of the stars. What secrets lie in the tablets that tell of Gilgamesh, the king whose story became legend, and whose legend may encode the cosmos itself? In 1853, in the ruins of Nineveh, beneath the palace mounds of ancient Assyria, archaeologist Hormuz Rassam uncovered something extraordinary, room after room filled with clay tablets, thousands upon thousands of them, carefully organized on shelves. This was the royal library of Ashurbanipal, the last great Assyrian king who ruled in the 7th century BC, and obsessively collected texts from across Mesopotamia. Among those tablets was a 12-tablet epic inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform telling the story of a king named Gilgamesh. At first, scholars treated it as pure mythology and ancient fantasy about superhuman heroes and impossible quests. But then excavations at Uruk began revealing something unexpected: inscriptions mentioning Gilgamesh not as a mythical figure, but as a historical ruler. His name appeared on brick stamps, in king lists, and administrative records dating to around 2700 BC. Temple dedications credited him with building Uruk's massive defensive walls, portions of which still stand today. Gilgamesh was real. But if the man was real, what do we make of his story? The Epic of Gilgamesh, as it came to be called, describes the adventures of a king who is 2/3 divine, and 1/3 human, a demigod ruler of Uruk who seeks immortality after the death of his companion Enkidu. The narrative takes him on a journey to the ends of the earth, through gardens of jewels, across waters of death, to find Utnapishtim, the sole survivor of the great flood who was granted eternal life by the gods. On the surface, it reads as heroic fantasy. But embedded within the texts are astronomical references so specific, so precise, that scholars now recognize the epic as something far more sophisticated, a mythic narrative encoding celestial knowledge. The journey begins with Gilgamesh and Enkidu traveling to the cedar forest to kill Humbaba, the guardian monster. Then they kill the bull of heaven sent by the goddess Ishtar in revenge. This sequence mirrors the constellation Taurus and its position in the spring sky during the age of Taurus, roughly 4000 to 2000 BC, precisely the period when the epic's earliest versions were composed. But the astronomical encoding becomes explicit later in the narrative. After Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh travels to find immortality. His path takes him to the edge of the world, where he reaches a mountain called Mashu, described in the tablets as the place where the sun rises and sets each day. At the mountain's gate stand scorpionmen, guardians who are terrifying to behold, with their gaze dealing death. The imagery is unmistakable. The scorpionmen represent Scorpius, the constellation that rises in the east while Taurus sets in the west, marking the equinox points where day and night balance. Mashu, the Twinpiak mountain where the sun enters and exits the world, represents the eastern and western horizons. At these precise moments, Gilgamesh's journey follows the sun's path, moving from the land of the living into the realm of darkness. Beyond the Scorpionmen, Gilgamesh walks through 12 leagues of absolute darkness, the 12 hours of night, the sun's nightly journey through the underworld. He emerges into a garden where trees bear jewels instead of fruit, glowing with cosmic light. This is the starfield itself, the heavens as seen at night, transformed into mythic landscape. Finally, he crosses the waters of death to reach Utnapishtim's dwelling, the realm beyond the horizon where the sun descends each evening, only to be reborn at dawn. Utnapishtim, his name means he who saw life, lives outside time, having survived the flood that reset the world. His immortality is not biological, but cyclical, the eternal return of the sun, the endless repetition of cosmic order. Here, in Tablet 11, Utnapishtim recounts the flood's story in detail. The gods decide to destroy humanity. Enki warns Utnapishtim in a dream, instructing him to build a boat, seal it with bitumen, and bring aboard his family and representatives of all living creatures. The flood comes. Waters rise for 7 days and 7 nights. When they recede, the boat comes to rest on a mountain. Utnapishtim releases birds to test for dry land, first a dove, then a swallow, finally a raven that does not return. The parallels to later flood narratives are obvious. But what matters here is geological confirmation. The flood layer at Shurapak, the catastrophic silt deposit dated to 2900 BC, aligns with the cultural memory preserved in this text. The epic doesn't invent the deluge, it remembers it, weaving historical catastrophe into cosmic mythology. Gilgamesh learns from Utnapishtim that immortality belongs only to the gods. Humans live, die, and are forgotten, except through the works they leave behind. The epic ends with Gilgamesh returning to Uruk, resigned to mortality, but proud of the walls he built, the city he ruled, the legacy inscribed in stone and clay. The message is both cosmic and deeply human. The stars follow eternal cycles, death and rebirth, setting and rising, darkness and light. Humans do not. We trace smaller arcs, but we participate in the larger pattern through what we create, what we remember, what we pass down. This layered encoding historical king, mythic hero, astronomical allegory explains why the story endured for over 2000 years. Copies of the Gilgamesh epic have been found in Hittite, Hurrian, and Babylonian. Fragments appear at Megiddo in Canaan, at Emar in Syria, at Ugarit on the Mediterranean coast. Every major culture in the ancient Near East knew this story, adapted it, retranslated it. Why such staying power? Because it functioned simultaneously as entertainment, religious instruction, historical record, and astronomical manual. A young scribe could copy the tablets to learn cuneiform, while simultaneously absorbing lessons about mortality, kingship, and cosmic order. A priest could recite the epic during rituals marking seasonal transitions, using Gilgamesh's journey to explain the sun's annual path through the zodiac. The king could claim descent from Gilgamesh to legitimize his rule, linking his dynasty to legendary origins. The tablets worked on every level: literal, symbolic, political, celestial. Modern translations often struggle to capture this multivalence. We separate myth from science, literature from astronomy, history from allegory. The Sumerians made no such distinctions. For them, all knowledge was unified. The movement of stars, the rise and fall of kings, the flooding of rivers, the growth of crops all were expressions of the same divine order, the same cosmic law written across different scales. Gilgamesh, standing at the intersection of history and myth, embodies this unity. He was a man who became a legend that became a constellation, a story that preserved memory across millennia, encoded in clay that survived when stone monuments crumbled and cities turned to dust. But if one set of tablets could link a historical king to the cosmos itself, encoding astronomical knowledge into narrative, then what other connections might the clay tablets reveal? The Sumer's myths reached across centuries, influencing cultures from Anatolia to the Levant. What about their physical reach, their trade networks, their diplomatic contacts, the roads and sea routes that connected them to distant lands? What tablets reveal Sumer's connections to places thousands of miles beyond Mesopotamia? Among the thousands of tablets recovered from ancient Mesopotamia, a curious set stands apart: not administrative records or religious hymns, but something closer to political correspondence wrapped in mythic language. These are the Enmerkar texts, named after a legendary king of Uruk who ruled sometime around 2700 BC, roughly contemporary with Gilgamesh. The tablets describe a prolonged rivalry between Uruk and a distant city called Aratta, located somewhere in the mountains far to the east. Enmerkar sends messengers across treacherous terrain carrying demands: submit to Uruk's authority. Send precious stones, gold, silver, and lapis lazuli to build temples. Acknowledge Inanna, goddess of Uruk, as supreme. Aratta's lord refuses. Messages go back and forth. Challenges are issued. The texts describe these exchanges in vivid detail, including the physical act of writing messages on clay tablets and sending them across vast distances by foot. One passage is particularly striking: Enmerkar's messenger travels so far, carrying such complex verbal instructions, that he forgets the message by the time he arrives. Frustrated, Enmerkar inscribes his words onto a clay tablet instead, and the text claims this was the first time anyone had done such a thing. Whether literally true or not, the passage suggests the Sumerians understood they were witnessing a revolutionary technology-written diplomatic correspondence. For decades, scholars treated Aratta as a pure fiction, a mythical rival invented to glorify Uruk, a literary device with no geographical reality. The descriptions seem too fantastic: a city in the highlands beyond the mountains, rich with stones and metals, culturally sophisticated enough to rival Sumer's greatest metropolis. Where could such a place have existed? Then archaeologists began working in southeastern Iran, in the Halil River Valley near the modern town of Jirt. Excavations starting in the early 2000s uncovered a Bronze Age civilization of unexpected sophistication, monumental architecture, advanced metallurgy, and most remarkably, thousands of carved chlorite vessels, soft stone bowls and vases, covered with intricate geometric and figurative designs. The iconography was unmistakable: serpent dragons, palm trees, bullman, scorpion. Figures, mythological scenes nearly identical to those found on Sumerian cylinder seals and temple reliefs. Yet the craftsmanship was distinct, a regional style suggesting an independent artistic tradition in dialogue with Mesopotamian culture, rather than derivative of it. More intriguing still, chemical analysis of lapis lazuli found in Sumerian sites traces back to mines in Badakhshan, Afghanistan, over 1,500 miles away. The same lapis appears in Jirif contexts. Chlorite vessels from Jirif have been found at Ur, Uruk, and Kish. The archaeological evidence confirms what the tablets suggested: extensive trade networks linking highland Iran to lowland Mesopotamia during the exact period described in the Enmerkar texts. Could Jirif be Aratta? The geographical description fits. The tablets place Aratta beyond 7 mountain ranges in a region rich with semi-precious stones. Jirif lies beyond the Zagros Mountains in a valley once far more fertile than today. The site dates to the right period, late 4th to early 3rd millennium BC, and the cultural sophistication matches what the texts describe: a rival civilization, not a primitive outpost. Other details align as well. The tablets mention Aratta's wealth in carnelian, a reddish stone prized throughout the ancient world. Carnelian sources exist in the Iranian plateau. They describe cedar wood, which would have grown in highland forests that have since vanished due to climate change. They reference complex irrigation systems, and Jirif shows evidence of sophisticated water management. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from linguistic analysis. The texts describe the Lord of Aratta speaking a different language than Sumerian, requiring translation. Early Jurft inscriptions use a Proto-Elamite script distinct from cuneiform, suggesting the region had its own writing system contemporary with Sumer's two literate civilizations in contact, each using different symbolic systems to record similar ideas. The diplomatic nature of these tablets is what makes them extraordinary. This isn't vague mythological geography far away in the land of magic mountains. These are specific concrete descriptions of political negotiation between urban centers, separated by hundreds of miles of difficult terrain. The fact that such correspondence existed at all around 2700 BC pushes back the history of international diplomacy by over 1,000 years. The tablets describe messengers traveling for weeks, crossing mountain passes, navigating foreign territories, carrying state messages that required memorization or written record. They describe trade negotiations, tribute demands, religious disputes, and cultural competition. This is statecraft, the earliest evidence we have of formal diplomatic relations between distant polities. The trade networks these relationships supported were vast. Beyond Aratta, Sumerian tablets reference other distant places. Doman, often identified with Bahrain in the Persian Gulf, described as a trading hub for copper and pearls. Magan, likely the Oman Peninsula, source of diorite and copper ore. Mulaha, almost certainly the Indus Valley civilization, over 1,000 miles from Mesopotamia, supplying carnelian, ivory, and exotic woods. Administrative tablets from list imports from all these regions, weights and measures standardized across trading partners, seals from the Indus Valley found in Mesopotamian contexts, and vice versa. This was Bronze Age globalization, a commercial network spanning from the Mediterranean to the Indus, facilitated by written contracts, standardized currencies, and diplomatic protocols recorded in clay. Climate science adds another dimension to the story. Paleoclimate data shows that the Iranian plateau was significantly wetter during the 4th and 3rd millennia BC. River valleys that are now semi-arid supported agriculture and dense settlement. This explains how Aratta could sustain a population capable of producing luxury goods for export and supporting the artisan class necessary for such sophisticated craftsmanship. But by 2000 BC, the same climatic shifts that would devastate Sumer also affected the highlands. Rainfall decreased, rivers diminished, agricultural zones contracted. Many Iranian plateau sites were abandoned. The trade networks fractured, and Aratta, if Jurft was indeed its location, faded from history, remembered only in tablets buried beneath Mesopotamian ruins. The Enmerkar texts, then, preserve memory of a world more interconnected than we once imagined. They show that even in humanity's earliest urban phase, cities didn't develop in isolation. Ideas, goods, and written messages traveled vast distances. Cultural influence flowed in multiple directions, and diplomatic relationships, rivalries, alliances, negotiations were already shaping international relations. The tablets themselves became the medium of this connection. Clay messages carried across mountain passes, lists of traded goods, diplomatic correspondence that required written form, because oral memory couldn't sustain such complex, detailed communication over such distances. In this sense, the Aratta tablets represent a profound innovation, the use of writing not just for record-keeping or religious texts, but for communication between distant powers, the technology that would eventually enable empires, international law, and global commerce, all nascent in these clay messages traveling between Uruk and a mountain city, whose ruins lay forgotten for 4,000 years. Yet for all their descriptions of rival kings and distant cities, the tablets remain oddly silent on one remarkable detail preserved elsewhere in Sumerian records. Among the endless lists of male rulers, military campaigns, and diplomatic exchanges, one extraordinary figure appears, someone who, according to the strict conventions of ancient Near Eastern kingship, should not exist at all. What woman's name appears in the king list, ruling not as queen consort but as sovereign in her own right? The Sumerian king list, with all its impossible reigns and divine genealogies, contains hundreds of names across thousands of years of recorded and legendary history: kings of Eridu, Uruk, Lagash, Kish, dynasty after dynasty, conquest after conquest. The list carefully records the transfer of kingship from city to city, always through male rulers. Except once. Buried in the 3rd dynasty of Kish, around 2500 BC, a single line breaks the pattern. Kubaba, the tavern-keeper, who made firm the foundations of Kish, became king and reigned 100 years. The detail is startling on multiple levels. First, she's a woman, the only female monarch listed as sole ruler in the entire document. Second, her occupation is specified: tavern-keeper, not priestess, not royal consort, not noble by birth. And third, her reign is described as successful, establishing dynastic stability rather than representing a brief interruption in legitimate rule. No explanation is given for how this happened. The tablets simply state the fact and move on. In a culture where political power was overwhelmingly male, where kingship was understood as a divine mandate passed from father to son, where temple hierarchies and military command structures excluded women from top positions, Kubaba's presence in the king list demands explanation. Some scholars initially assumed scribal error or misinterpretation. Perhaps Kubaba was a male ruler whose name was feminized in later copies. Perhaps the entry referred to a queen regent ruling briefly for an underage son. Perhaps the title tavern-keeper was metaphorical, indicating some cultic role we no longer understand. But the evidence doesn't support these dismissals. Multiple independent versions of the king list include Kubaba with consistent details. Her name is unambiguously feminine in Sumerian grammar. And most significantly, other tablets reference her reign as historical fact, not legend. Administrative texts from Kish mention her name in context suggesting actual governance. Legal documents dated to her reign survive. Temple dedications credit her with construction projects. The archaeological record, fragmentary as it is, confirms that someone named Kubaba ruled Kish and maintained stable control long enough to be remembered by later generations. Her origins as a tavern-keeper are equally intriguing. In ancient Mesopotamia, taverns held ambiguous social status. They were necessary institutions, places where workers gathered, where beer, a dietary staple, was distributed, where informal business transactions occurred. Tavern keepers were typically women, managing establishments that served both economic and social functions. But taverns also existed on the margins of respectable society. They were associated with prostitution, gambling, and a kind of loose social mixing that made religious authorities nervous. The Code of Hammurabi, written centuries after Kubaba, dedicates several laws to regulating tavern keepers, treating them with suspicion as potential sources of disorder. Yet somehow, from this marginal position, Kubaba ascended to the throne of Kish, one of Sumer's major city-states, a political center that competed with Uruk-Kandur for regional dominance. The king list doesn't describe a revolution or usurpation. It presents her rule as legitimate, part of the natural succession of dynasties. One theory suggests she may have risen to power during a period of political instability, perhaps filling a vacuum when the previous ruling family collapsed or failed to produce heirs. Her 100-year reign, likely symbolic rather than literal, would then represent either a long period of stability or a dynasty founded by her that lasted several generations. This interpretation gains support from what comes after. The king list records that Kubaba made firm the foundations of Kish language, used elsewhere to describe rulers who restored order after chaos, who rebuilt institutions, who established new administrative systems. Her reign marks a turning point, a stabilization after turbulence. The fact that her occupation is mentioned at all is significant. Most kings are identified only by name and city. When occupations appear, they're typically priestly or military. The inclusion of tavern keepers suggests this detail was too remarkable to omit. It was part of what made her story memorable, the extraordinary origin that made her rise noteworthy. But Kubaba's story doesn't end with her death or even with the end of her dynasty. Something stranger happens. She becomes a goddess. In later centuries, as Sumerian culture blended with Akkadian, then Babylonian, then spread northward into Anatolia, a goddess named Kubaba begins appearing in religious texts. By the 2nd millennium BC, she's worshipped across Syria and Anatolia as a mother goddess associated with fertility, sovereignty, and protection. Her iconography shows her holding the pomegranate and a mirror, symbols of life and truth. By the 1st millennium BC, the Greeks encountered this goddess in Phrygia and adopted her into their pantheon as Cybele, the Great Mother, one of the most important deities of the ancient Mediterranean world. Her cult spreads to Rome, where she becomes Magna Mater, worshipped with elaborate rituals and ecstatic celebrations. The connection seems clear. A historical woman who ruled Kish becomes, over centuries, a divine figure. Memory transforms into myth. A tavern keeper who sees power in the early dynastic period becomes the cosmic mother who governs kings. This process, the deification of historical figures, isn't unique to Kubaba. Gilgamesh followed a similar trajectory. But what makes Kubaba's case remarkable is the preservation of both stages: the tablets that record her as mortal ruler and the inscriptions that venerate her as goddess, separated by over 1,000 years. It reveals how Bronze Age societies processed exceptional individuals. When someone broke the normal pattern so dramatically, a woman ruling where only men should rule, a commoner ascending where only nobility should reign, they couldn't simply be remembered as unusual humans. They had to be reclassified as something more than human. Their extraordinary achievements explained through divine essence rather than historical circumstance. The implications for understanding early female leadership are profound. Kubaba's presence in the king list proves that women could, under certain circumstances, exercise sovereign political power in Bronze Age Mesopotamia. Her success in maintaining that power, her ability to make firm the foundations, suggests competence that contemporary sources acknowledged. Yet the fact that she remains singular, the only woman listed among hundreds of male rulers, shows how exceptional this was. The political structures, religious ideologies, and social hierarchies of Sumerian civilization were built to exclude women from top governance. Kubaba represents not the rule but the exception, the extraordinary case that proves how rigid the normal patterns were. Their story, preserved in tablets scattered across museums and private collections, captures something essential about how history becomes legend, and legend becomes theology. The clay records facts a woman ruled. Later generations, unable to fit this fact into their worldview, transformed it. The woman becomes divine, and eventually the divine figure eclipses the historical person entirely, until all that remains is myth. But the tablets remember. Beneath the goddess lies the tavern-keeper. Beneath the cosmic mother lies the ruler of Kish. And in that layering of memory, clay preserves what should have been forgotten: a woman who shaped a dynasty, who appears in history's first comprehensive political record, who defied every expectation about who could wield power in the ancient world. As someone from the margins, a tavern-keeper with no royal blood could fundamentally alter Sumer's political landscape, then what other systems did the Sumerians create that would reshape not just their own world, but the entire future of civilization? What mathematical framework did they develop that we still use every single day, 5,000 years after their cities turned to dust? Every time you glance at a clock, you're using Sumerian mathematics. Every time you navigate with a compass, measure an angle, or reference the zodiac, you're relying on a numerical system invented over 5,000 years ago in the mudbrick cities of Mesopotamia. The Sumerians didn't count by tens like most modern systems. They counted by 60s. This sexagesimal system BASC 60 mathematics appears fully formed in the earliest clay tablets, with no clear developmental stages leading up to it. By 3000 BC, Sumerian scribes were using sophisticated +7 notation, performing complex calculations, and recording astronomical observations using mathematical frameworks that would remain fundamentally unchanged for millennia. The question that has puzzled historians isn't whether this system worked; it clearly did, but why they chose 60 in the first place. BASC 10 makes intuitive sense. Humans have 10 fingers. Counting on hands naturally leads to decimal systems, which is why most cultures independently develop BASC 10 mathematics. But BASC 60 seems arbitrary, unnecessarily complex for a civilization just beginning to explore abstract numerical thought. Except it isn't arbitrary at all. 60 is mathematically exceptional. It's the smallest number divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. This means it can be divided evenly into halves, thirds, quarters, fifths, and sixths, without generating fractions, a crucial advantage for a culture doing calculations on clay tablets without easy ways to represent decimals. For practical purposes like dividing rations, measuring land, or calculating labor shares, BASC 60 eliminated the messy remainders that plagued BASC 10 division. But the choice goes deeper than practical convenience. 60 is also astronomically significant. The Sumerians observed that the zodiac, the band of sky through which the sun, moon, and planets move, could be divided into 12 sections, corresponding to 12 lunar months. Each section could then be subdivided into 30 degrees, creating 360 total degrees in a circle. This whole TIMES 30 structure, based on observable celestial cycles, naturally yields numbers compatible with BASC 60 mathematics. They noticed that 6 60-day periods roughly equal 1 solar year, that 60 lunar months equal 5 solar years almost exactly, that the synodic period of Venus, the time between its appearances as morning and evening star, could be expressed elegantly in BASC 60 fractions. The mathematical system and the cosmos it described fit together like components of a single mechanism. Evidence of how sophisticated this mathematics became appears in tablets scattered across museum collections. One of the most remarkable is Plumpton 322, a clay tablet dating to around 1800 BC, now housed at Columbia University. At first glance, it looks like an administrative record, 4 columns of numbers arranged in 15 rows. But when mathematicians analyzed it closely in the 20th century, they realized what they were seeing: Pythagorean triples, sets of 3 numbers that satisfy the equation A superscript 2 plus B superscript 2 equals C superscript 2, the relationship that defines right triangles, supposedly discovered by Pythagoras over 1,000 years later. The tablet lists these triples systematically, not randomly. It's organized by a sophisticated understanding of number theory, showing that Babylonian mathematicians, inheritors of Sumerian mathematical tradition, understood the relationships between squares and roots, could generate new Pythagorean triples from existing ones, and had explored pure mathematics far beyond practical calculation. This wasn't mathematics for surveying fields or building walls. This was theoretical exploration of numerical relationships, mathematics for its own sake, pursued by scribes who found beauty in abstract pattern. The BASC 60 system made this kind of exploration possible. Its rich divisibility allowed for complex fractions, intricate ratios, and precise astronomical calculations that would have been cumbersome or impossible in other numerical frameworks. Tablets recording eclipse predictions, planetary positions, and lunar cycles demonstrate multi-generational observational programs where data accumulated across centuries, each generation adding refinements to inherited tables. This continuity is crucial. Accurate astronomical prediction requires patient observation over time scales longer than individual lifetimes. The Sumerians must have maintained institutional structures, temple schools, scribal academies, astronomical priesthoods that preserve data across generations, building collective knowledge that no single observer could achieve. Consider the precession of the equinoxes, the 26,000-year cycle mentioned earlier. You can't observe this directly within a human lifetime. It requires comparing observations separated by centuries, noticing that star positions shift gradually against the calendar, then extrapolating the full cycle from fragmentary data. That the Sumerians appear to have understood this phenomenon suggests they had access to records spanning many generations, preserved in tablets that survived fires, floods, and political upheavals. Their timekeeping system reflects this astronomical foundation. They divided the day into 12 double hours, each containing 30 jesh, smaller units we would recognize as equivalent to 4 minutes. The structure mirrors the zodiac's organization, 12 major divisions, each subdivided using BASC 60 logic. Day and night weren't separate systems. They were parts of the same cosmic wheel, measured in mathematically compatible units. This is why our modern timekeeping still uses 60 seconds per minute, 60 minutes per hour. When Hellenistic astronomers adopted Babylonian astronomical tables, they inherited the BASC 60 time divisions along with the data. When Islamic scholars preserved and expanded this knowledge during the medieval period, they maintained the 60 base structure. And when Renaissance Europe rediscovered these texts, they incorporated the Sumerian sexagesimal system into the mechanical clocks that would eventually standardize global timekeeping. Every wristwatch is a Sumerian artifact. The same applies to angular measurement, the 360-degree circle, divided into 60 arc-minute degrees, each subdivided into 60 arcseconds. This entire system descends directly from Sumerian astronomical practice. When navigators plot courses, when engineers calculate trajectories, when astronomers map the sky, they're using mathematical frameworks invented in ancient Mesopotamia. Even the zodiac's 12-sign structure preserves Sumerian cosmology. The constellations themselves predate Sumer. Humans have always seen patterns in stars. But the systematic 12-fold division, the assignment of 30 degrees per sign, the integration of zodiacal positions into mathematical astronomy, these innovations emerge from Sumerian temple observatories, where priests track celestial cycles to determine festival dates, predict eclipses, and interpret divine will. The tablets reveal how deeply mathematics penetrated Sumerian consciousness. They didn't separate calculation from cosmology or geometry from theology. Numbers were the language through which divine order expressed itself. The same ratios that govern temple architecture also appeared in planetary motion. The same divisions that organized the calendar also structured ritual time. This unified worldview, where mathematics, astronomy, architecture, and religion formed a seamless whole, explains the system's durability. BASC 60 wasn't just a counting method, it was a framework for understanding reality, connecting human activity to cosmic pattern. Abandoning it would mean dismantling an entire way of seeing the universe. So it persisted through Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian empires, through Hellenistic astronomy and Islamic mathematics, into European science and eventually global modernity. The tablets that preserve this knowledge, brittle clay inscribed with wedge-shaped marks, carried mathematical truths across 5,000 years. But mathematics wasn't the only thing recorded in those tablets. Administrative texts reveal another secret evidence of connections spanning distances that should have been impossible for Bronze Age civilizations to regularly traverse. If BASC 60 mathematics tied Sumer to the cosmos above, what networks tied them to distant lands across deserts, mountains, and seas? What tablets revealed trade routes linking Mesopotamian cities to civilizations thousands of miles away, creating history's first global economy? Among the administrative tablets recovered from one category appears with surprising frequency: trade manifests listing goods from distant lands. These aren't vague references to foreign luxuries, but specific place names, quantities, and cargo details that reveal a commercial network of startling sophistication. 3 names appear repeatedly: Dilmun, Magan, and Malaha. Dilmun, identified with modern Bahrain and the eastern Arabian coast, served as a central trading hub. Tablets describe it as a transshipment point where goods from distant sources were consolidated before final delivery to Mesopotamian cities. Copper ingots, pearls, semi-precious stones, exotic woods all flowed through Dilmun's ports. Some texts describe it in almost mythic terms as a pure land, a paradise where sickness and death were unknown, suggesting it held spiritual significance beyond its commercial importance. Magan, most likely the Oman Peninsula, supplied the black diorite stone used for royal statues and inscriptions. Tablets record specific shipments: 20 talents of copper from Magan, diorite from the mountains of Magan. Archaeological surveys along the Omani coast have revealed extensive ancient copper mining operations, slag heaps, and smelting sites that correlate precisely with the periods mentioned in Sumerian texts. But Malaha is the most remarkable. Based on the goods described: carnelian beads, ivory, exotic wood, dyewoods, particular styles of pottery. Scholars now confidently identify Malaha with the Indus Valley civilization, centered in modern Pakistan and northwestern India, over 1,000 miles from southern Mesopotamia across open ocean. The evidence for this connection goes beyond texts. Indus Valley seals, distinctive square-stamped seals with unique iconography and undeciphered script, have been found in Mesopotamian archaeological contexts at Ur, Uruk, and Kish. Conversely, Mesopotamian cylinder seals appear at Indus sites like Lothal and Mohenjo-daro. Chemical analysis of carnelian beads found in Sumerian royal tombs traces their origin to specific quarries in Gujarat. This wasn't occasional contact. This was sustained, regular trade maintained over centuries. Maritime archaeology has begun reconstructing these routes: ancient harbor installations in the Persian Gulf, tablet references to specific ship types and cargo capacities, evidence of standardized weights and measures used across trading partners, suggesting formal commercial agreements. The tablets describe professional merchant classes, shipping contracts, and even insurance-like arrangements where losses at sea were distributed among investors. This was Bronze Age globalization, a commercial network spanning from the eastern Mediterranean to the Indus River, facilitated by written contracts, standardized currencies, and diplomatic protocols. Goods moved along routes that would later become foundations for the Silk Road. But these maritime and overland passages were already ancient when Babylon rose to power. The tablets don't just record what was traded. They reveal how trade functioned: the merchant guilds, the temple institutions that financed expeditions, the legal frameworks governing contracts, the diplomatic relationships that secured safe passage through foreign territories. This was complex, systematic international commerce 2,000 years before the Roman Empire. Cylinder seals with impossible precision. While administrative tablets recorded trade, another category of artifacts authenticated its cylinder seals. These small stone cylinders, typically no larger than a thumb, were carved with intricate scenes, and then rolled across wet clay to create impressed signatures on documents, storage containers, and personal correspondence. Every adult in Sumerian society owned a seal. They functioned simultaneously as legal signature, personal identification, and spiritual protection. Contracts were invalid without the pressed seal impressions of all parties. Storage rooms were secured with clay seals that would break if tampered with. Letters carried seal impressions proving their sender's identity. But some seals transcend their utilitarian function. The finest examples, often found in royal or priestly contexts, display craftsmanship that borders on the impossible. Under magnification, these seals reveal details microscopic in their precision: figures with individually carved fingers, each smaller than a pinhead; cuneiform inscriptions with wedges barely visible to the naked eye; cosmological scenes depicting planetary processions, mythological narratives, or geometric patterns of extraordinary complexity, all carved into hard stones like lapis lazuli, hematite, or serpentine. The tools available to Sumerian craftsmen shouldn't have allowed this precision. Yet the work exists, preserved in museum collections worldwide. Some seals contain details so fine that modern researchers debate whether ancient craftspeople used magnifying lenses, rock crystal, or water-filled glass spheres that could enlarge the working surface. No definitive evidence of such optical tools has been found in Mesopotamian contexts. Yet the work itself seems to demand their existence. The alternative, that seal cutters achieved this precision through unaided vision and extraordinary skill, is perhaps even more remarkable, suggesting levels of manual dexterity and artistic ability that challenge our assumptions about ancient capabilities. The imagery on these seals often depicts cosmic themes: the sun, moon, and Venus arranged in specific configurations, gods standing on mountains that represent celestial realms, processions that mirror zodiacal sequences. These weren't merely decorative. They were portable cosmologies, miniature representations of divine order that their owners carried as identity and protection. Each seal was unique. When impressed into clay, it left a signature that couldn't be forged: the ancient world's equivalent of biometric identification. But more than legal tools, they were spiritual objects. Many include prayers or protective formulas. Some name their owners and invoke divine guardianship. They were buried with the dead, suggesting belief that identity and protection extended beyond death. The tablets and seals worked together as a system. Written records validated by seal impressions created an information network more reliable than oral testimony. Commerce, law, and administration all depended on this combination of writing and authentication. Without both elements, the complex society recorded in the tablets couldn't have functioned. Among the hymns and religious texts, one tablet stands out for its unexpected practicality: the hymn to Ninkasi, goddess of beer, composed around 1800 BC, but preserving much older traditions. The text functions simultaneously as religious poetry and brewing recipe. It describes in detail soaking barley until it sprouts, drying and grinding the malted grain, mixing with water and honey-sweetened bread, allowing fermentation, filtering through straw mats, and storing in large jars. Follow these instructions precisely, and you'll produce beer essentially identical to what Sumerian workers drank 4,500 years ago. Modern brewers have done exactly that, using only ingredients and techniques described in the hymn. They've recreated ancient Sumerian beer, a thick, nutritious beverage, more like liquid bread than modern beer, consumed through straws to avoid the sediment at the bottom. But this wasn't recreational drinking. Beer was fundamental to Sumerian civilization in ways that go far beyond intoxication. Tablets record that workers received daily beer rations as part of their wages, not as a luxury, but as essential nutrition. The brewing process made grain more digestible, increased its nutritional value, and purified water that might otherwise carry disease. Beer provided calories, B vitamins, and sustenance that sustained laborers building ziggurats, digging canals, and harvesting fields. It also held profound religious significance. Beer was offered to the gods in temple rituals. The hymn describes Ninkasi as one who handles the dough with a big shovel, mixing in a pit, the vapor, with sweet aromatics. The language is reverent, treating brewing as a sacred act. Beer bridged mortal and divine, human labor and cosmic order. The biochemistry involved is surprisingly sophisticated. Malting grain, allowing it to sprout before drying, activates enzymes that convert starches to sugars. Fermentation transforms those sugars to alcohol while producing carbon dioxide and flavor compounds. Temperature control, timing, and ingredient ratios all affect the final product. The Sumerians understood these principles empirically, developing techniques that wouldn't be scientifically explained until the 19th century. Tablets also record beer's medicinal applications. Mixed with specific herbs or minerals, it served as a delivery medium for various treatments. Recipes describe beer-based remedies for digestive ailments, infections, even dental problems. The alcohol content helped dissolve active compounds while providing antiseptic properties. In a civilization without coffee or tea, beer served as the primary social beverage. Taverns like the one Kubaba operated were centers of community life. Business was conducted over beer. Disputes were mediated over beer. Friendships were sealed over beer. The brewing goddess presided over these transactions, making every cup a reminder of civilization's bounty. These three secrets, trade networks, cylinder seals, and beer, revealed the human dimension of Sumerian civilization. Not the cosmic mysteries encoded in astronomy or mathematics, but the daily realities: merchants tracking shipments, craftspeople carving impossible details, brewers transforming grain into sustenance. The tablets preserve both scales simultaneously, reminding us that the same people who calculated planetary cycles also worried about copper deliveries, legal authentication, and beer quality. But if the tablet so thoroughly documents Sumer's achievements, its trade networks, technologies, and daily practices, then what do they reveal about its end? What final secret appears in the administrative records, showing not civilization's rise, but its slow, inexorable collapse?